You are nothing but a weight we are forced to carry. Those words came out of my daughter's mouth on my birthday, sharp and careless, the moment I asked her for a small favor. By the end of that same night, I was standing outside the house I had lived in for years, the house I had paid for, supported, and sacrificed for, with nowhere to go. I had spent my life backing them financially, emotionally, and quietly, never keeping score. Yet in a single day, I was reduced to a problem they wanted removed. That was when I shut down their access to every credit card in my name. That was when I canceled the first-class tickets they were bragging about, the ones bound for a luxury vacation in Maui. And that was when I did something they truly believed I did not have the nerve to do. Still, that was only the opening move. What came next surprised even me. Earlier that morning, before everything collapsed, I stood in the kitchen holding a wrinkled shopping list. The paper bent in my hand like promises that had long stopped meaning anything. I cleared my throat and spoke carefully. "Emily," I said, trying to sound casual, "could you drive me to the grocery store? I need to pick up supplies for the barbecue tonight." Sunlight spilled through the wide windows of our Spokane kitchen, landing on cluttered countertops littered with half-empty coffee mugs and unopened mail. It felt like a place where conversations had been abandoned halfway through for years. My daughter barely looked up from her phone. Her expression was flat, distant, colder than an early January morning. "Are you kidding me right now?" she said. "It will not take long," I replied. "I invited Mark and Linda. Maybe Paul will stop by too." "Dad." "No." She pushed her chair back hard enough that it screeched against the tile. "I am not your driver. I am not your servant." I stared at her, confused by how quickly her tone had turned cruel. "You are just a burden we have to carry," she added, voice tight and irritated. "Do you understand that?" The sentence landed like a punch to the chest. I was 65 years old, and my own child spoke to me as if I were some useless obligation she had been unfairly assigned. "Emily," I said quietly, "it is my birthday. I only wanted to cook for a few friends." She laughed, short and sharp. "Your birthday?" she scoffed. "You really think that makes you special? You think that changes anything?" That was when her husband, Brian, appeared in the doorway. His arms were crossed, his face already annoyed. "What is all the yelling about?" he asked. "He wants me to drive him around like a taxi," Emily snapped. "Like I have nothing better to do." Brian shook his head slowly. "Come on, Frank," he said, using my name with that familiar edge of contempt. "Can you not figure things out on your own for once? We are not a charity." My grip tightened around the list. Beer, steaks, corn, charcoal, nothing extravagant. Just the basics for a quiet birthday gathering. I had never demanded much in my life. "You have never asked for much?" Emily shot back. "You live here. You eat our food. You use the electricity, the water, everything. Our entire lives revolve around taking care of you." The kitchen went still, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator. Our house. That phrase echoed in my head. The home I had purchased for them. The mortgage I had paid. The place where I had asked for nothing except a small corner to grow old with dignity. "All right," I said finally, reaching for my coat. "I will handle it myself." "Do not act like a victim," Emily snapped, slamming her hand on the counter. "We all know how this goes." I walked out without replying. On the counter sat a birthday card from my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, unopened and forgotten. I did not look back. The cold morning air stung my face as I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady, even though something inside my chest felt like it was shaking apart. "City cab," I said when the dispatcher answered. "I need a ride to Harbor Market." The taxi arrived quickly. The driver gave a polite nod as I slid into the cracked vinyl seat. Through the window, I watched the house grow smaller behind us. The fence I had painted the previous summer now looked less like a boundary and more like a set of bars. "Special occasion?" the driver asked, glancing at my list. "Birthday barbecue," I replied. The words felt hollow in my mouth. As we passed through downtown Spokane, memories flooded in without warning. signing the deed over to Emily and Brian because I believed I was securing their future, writing checks for college tuition, paying for the wedding without hesitation. Every sacrifice had been given willingly, out of love. Harbor Market was crowded with weekend shoppers. I chose everything carefully. Thick ribeye steaks, corn still wrapped in fresh husks, high-quality charcoal. At the register, a young cashier with kind eyes helped bag my items. "Having company?" he asked. "A few old friends," I said. I paid with cash, money I had withdrawn earlier in the week. The ride back passed in silence. The driver helped carry the bags to the front door and waved off my attempt to give him extra money. That small kindness stayed with me. Inside, the house was unnaturally quiet. Emily and Brian were gone, likely hiding away and complaining about how inconvenient my existence was. I unpacked slowly, placing the steaks in the refrigerator, setting the corn in a bowl, lining up the charcoal by the back door. In the dining room, I pulled out my good plates, the ones my late wife, Susan, and I had received as wedding gifts 4 decades earlier. I laid the table carefully, as though order and ceremony might restore something I had lost. Outside, the grill stood clean and ready, its metal surface shining in the afternoon light. As I smoothed the tablecloth, something inside me settled and hardened. It was a kind of resolve I had not felt in years. Soon the doorbell rang. Mark and Linda arrived smiling, holding a bottle of wine. "Happy birthday, you stubborn old man," Mark said, clapping me on the shoulder. Linda kissed my cheek, her perfume bringing back memories of easier times. Paul arrived moments later with a six-pack and his usual flannel shirt. "Ready to grill, Frank?" We gathered in the backyard beneath a wide Washington sky. The grill ignited with a satisfying roar, blue and orange flames dancing beneath the grate. I placed the steaks down as Mark opened beers, the familiar ritual grounding me. "Remember when we did this every weekend?" Paul said, sinking into a lawn chair. "Back when we thought we were indestructible," Mark added. Linda laughed. "Speak for yourselves. I still plan to live forever." Their laughter filled the yard, warm and genuine. This was all I had wanted. Real company, respect, to feel welcome. As the steaks sizzled and smoke curled upward, Mark glanced toward the house. "Are Emily and Brian coming out to join us?" he asked. "I will ask them," I said quietly. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stepped back inside. I found Emily and Brian sprawled in the living room, each of them glued to their phones, thumbs moving non-stop, faces lit by screens instead of by anything human. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone calm. "My friends are here. Do you want to come outside and say hello?" Emily finally looked up. Her mouth twisted into a sour expression, like she had just tasted something unpleasant. "No thanks," she said. "I am not interested in hanging out with a bunch of old people." Brian did not even bother lifting his head. "Yeah," he muttered, I still locked on his screen. "We will skip the retirement parade." Heat rushed into my face, sharp and embarrassing. "They are good people," I said. "They would like to meet you." "I am sure they would," Emily replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But I have better things to do than pretend to care about your depressing little birthday cookout." I turned and walked back outside, forcing a smile that felt stiff and artificial. The open door had carried every word into the backyard. I could tell my friends had heard it all. They suddenly became very focused on their drinks, on the lawn, on anything except my face. "Everything okay?" Linda asked gently. "Yeah," I said quickly. "They are just busy." I flipped the steaks, grease snapping against the hot grill. As I did, a memory crashed into me without warning. 3 years earlier, Brian had sat across from me at this same table, excited and nervous, pitching a vague startup idea about mobile software. I had written him a check for $15,000 on the spot. I believed in him, even when his explanations were thin. The business collapsed within 6 months. The money disappeared, never mentioned again. "These steaks look great," Paul said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. I served the food on my good plates, the same ones I had laid out so carefully earlier. We ate mostly in silence. The food should have tasted wonderful, but it felt dry and flavorless in my mouth despite their polite praise. "Well," Mark said after a while, glancing at his watch, "we should probably head out. Linda has her book club early tomorrow." "Of course," I said, standing and gathering plates. "Let me walk you to the gate." They moved with the smooth efficiency of people who knew when it was time to leave an uncomfortable situation. At the door, Linda squeezed my hand. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Frank," she said softly. "The steaks were perfect. And happy birthday." Mark's handshake lingered. "Take care of yourself," he said. I walked them out and stood there until their taillights vanished into the cool Washington dusk. The air smelled of dying charcoal and something else I did not want to name. Birds settled into the trees with soft final sounds, like punctuation marks at the end of a long day. When I went back inside, Emily and Brian were waiting in the living room. Their arms were crossed, their faces set, like judges ready to pass sentence. The front door closed behind me with a final sound, as if sealing off the last piece of the life I thought I had. "Nice little party," Emily said, her tone sharp with mockery. "Really showed us how important you are." Brian smiled, cold and calculating. "Yeah, Frank. Very impressive guest list." I stood there, hands still smelling of smoke and disappointment, feeling something unfamiliar and dangerous beginning to stir in my chest. Behind me, the dining room table still held the remains of the evening. Crumpled napkins, empty glasses. One paper napkin lay on the floor, forgotten and alone. I closed the door carefully. The click echoed through the house like a choice being locked in. The living room was dim, lit only by the flickering blue light of the television. Emily and Brian stood rigid, unmoving. "Real nice performance you put on out there," Emily said, her voice cutting. Brian stepped closer, his jaw tight. "What the hell were you thinking, Frank? Bringing those people into our house?" "They're my friends," I replied. My voice stayed level, even as something cold settled in my stomach. "They came to celebrate. This is our house," Brian snapped, pointing at me like his finger was a weapon. "You live under our roof. You do not get to invite people over whenever you feel like it." Emily nodded, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "We did not agree to host your little senior social club." "I cooked," I said. "I cleaned. They did not disturb anything." "That is not the point," Brian shot back, his voice rising. "The point is you do not make decisions here. You are a guest in this house, and guests do not throw parties." Guest. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A guest in the house I had bought when they could not afford rent. The house where my name was on the mortgage. The house I believed meant family. "If you cannot respect our rules," Emily said, crossing her arms tighter, "then maybe you should find somewhere else to live." Silence stretched between us. The refrigerator hummed somewhere in the background. Late-night television murmured uselessly. I looked at them, my daughter and her husband, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. "Fine," I said. Emily blinked, clearly expecting a fight. "What?" I said fine. I turned toward the stairs, my hand gripping the banister. "I will pack." Brian scoffed behind me. "Do not be dramatic. We are just setting boundaries." I climbed the stairs without answering. Each step was slow and deliberate. At the end of the hallway waited my room. The guest room, apparently. I pulled my old suitcase from the closet. The leather handle was worn smooth from decades of work trips and family vacations. I folded clothes carefully, gathered my toiletries, and reached for the photograph of Susan and me from our last anniversary, taken before cancer took her away. My fingers traced her smile as I wrapped the frame in a soft shirt. That was when the memory hit me, sudden and sharp, and I knew nothing about this night was finished yet. Emily's wedding flashed through my mind as I stood there holding the suitcase. 6 years earlier, that day had been nothing but pride and joy. The reception alone had cost a staggering amount. $28,000 for flowers, catering, the photographer, every elegant detail she wanted. I had signed the check without a second thought, watching my daughter glide across the dance floor in her white dress, convinced I was paying into her happiness. That night, Susan and I had sat together, exhausted but smiling, and I told her it was worth every dollar. Now, that same daughter wanted me out of the house because I had invited friends over for dinner. I zipped the suitcase closed. The sound cut sharply through the quiet room. I checked my pockets. My wallet was still there, thick with the cash I had taken out for the barbecue. My keys followed. Then I paused. The car. It was registered in both our names. Another generous decision from years ago. Another chain I had wrapped around myself without realizing it. Downstairs, Emily and Brian were back on the couch, pretending to watch television. Neither of them looked up when I came down the stairs. The wheels of my suitcase rolled softly across the hardwood floor. I placed my house key on the coffee table. It landed with a small, deliberate click. For a moment, the metal reflected the blue glow of the television before slipping into shadow. "Frank," Emily started to say. I did not stop. "Where are you going?" Brian asked, and for the first time, his voice carried something close to uncertainty. I opened the front door. Cool night air rushed in, filling the space between us. "Out," I said. I closed the door carefully behind me. This time, I was standing on the outside, suitcase in hand, on the porch of a house that was no longer mine. The street stretched ahead into darkness, streetlights casting soft yellow pools on empty pavement. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then went silent. I took my first step away from the house. The suitcase wheels began their steady rhythm against the concrete. The night air tasted like freedom and fear mixed together. My footsteps echoed as the house faded behind me, swallowed by distance and shadow. The suitcase rattled over cracks in the sidewalk, each jolt traveling up my arm like a reminder of everything I had left behind. Spokane felt different at night. Quieter, gentler. Streetlights formed islands of warmth in the cool air, and my breath rose in small clouds before vanishing. The familiar weight of my wallet pressed against my chest. There was enough cash inside to get by for several weeks if I was careful. As I walked, memories surfaced without permission. Emily at 18, crying in my kitchen after her first heartbreak. I had held her while she sobbed, promising her that she deserved better, that someone would one day treat her with kindness and respect. The irony of that promise settled heavily in my chest now. The sidewalk led toward the commercial strip, where I knew there was a modest motel. My legs, unused to long walks, already ached, but the discomfort felt strangely purifying. Each step was a quiet act of rebellion against years of swallowing my feelings. A car passed, headlights briefly illuminating my path before disappearing around a corner. I wondered what the driver thought of an older man dragging a suitcase down an empty street. I felt no shame. If anything, I felt more purposeful than I had in months. I passed the elementary school Emily had attended as a child. The playground equipment cast long, twisted shadows in the moonlight. I remembered picking her up here, her small hand wrapped tightly in mine as she talked nonstop about her day. When had that warm, trusting child turned into someone who could order me out of my own home? Then came the memory that nearly stopped me in my tracks. Susan's funeral. Emily clinging to me as the dirt fell onto the casket, her body shaking as I held her upright. I had promised her then that I would always be there, that she would never feel abandoned. For 2 years after Susan died, I had been Emily's anchor. I drove her to therapy appointments. I answered late-night phone calls. I showed up whenever she needed me. And this was where it ended. A house key on a coffee table. A suitcase rolling down an empty street. The neon sign of the Pine Lodge Motel flickered ahead, its red letters buzzing softly, announcing vacancy like an invitation. I picked up my pace, though I was not sure whether it was exhaustion or relief pushing me forward. The night clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and an honest smile, checked me in without a single question. She handed me an old-fashioned metal key. "Room 12, she said. "Quiet spot in the back." The key felt solid in my hand. Real. Reliable. Room 12 smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old smoke. There was a single bed with a faded floral blanket, a small table with two mismatched chairs, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. It was not much, but it belonged to me for the night. I unpacked slowly, hanging my shirts in the narrow closet, lining up my toiletries on the sink. I placed the photograph of Susan on the nightstand, her smile steadying me in the unfamiliar room. When everything was in its place, I lay back on the bed fully dressed, my hands folded behind my head, staring at the ceiling. Water stains formed strange shapes above me. Somewhere inside the walls, pipes gurgled quietly beneath the vast Washington sky, stars scattered like forgotten wishes. Numbers began lining up in my thoughts, uninvited but impossible to ignore. Emily's college tuition, $43,000. Brian's car after he lost his sales job, $18,000. The down payment on their first apartment, $12,000. Wedding costs, emergency loans, Christmas gifts, birthday checks. How much had I given them over the years? How much of myself had I poured into their lives, believing love meant sacrifice without limits? My breathing slowed as something solid took shape inside my chest. It was not anger. Anger burned too fast. This was colder, sharper, a calm, unmistakable certainty. I was finished being treated like a burden by people who had built their lives on my generosity. The ceiling stared back at me, offering no answers, yet somehow confirming what I already knew. Tomorrow would not look like yesterday. Tomorrow, I would stop being the man who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. Tomorrow, I would begin acting like someone who understood his own value. Morning light slipped through the thin motel curtains, gentle and unassuming, painting soft gold stripes across the worn carpet. I stretched in the narrow bed and realized, with mild surprise, that I had slept better than I had in months. The unfamiliar room had not bothered me at all. If anything, leaving that house had lifted a weight I had carried for so long that I had forgotten it was there. I got dressed quickly, my hands steady as I buttoned my shirt. The mirror above the small dresser reflected a man who looked different from the one who had checked in the night before. The same face, the same graying hair, but something in my eyes had shifted. There was clarity there now. Purpose. The room phone sat on the nightstand, solid and old-fashioned, real buttons instead of a touchscreen. I picked up the receiver and dialed the local taxi company. Yes, I said calmly. Pine Lodge Motel. I need a ride to Cascade National Bank on Oak Street. 10 minutes, the voice on the other end replied. Outside, Spokane was waking up. The taxi arrived right on time, the driver offering a brief nod as I slid into the back seat. Through the window, I watched the town ease into its daily rhythm. Coffee shops unlocking their doors. People walking dogs. Children waiting for school buses. Ordinary moments in a community I had lived in for decades, yet somehow had never fully claimed as my own. Bank business? The driver asked, catching my eye in the mirror. Taking care of some accounts, I replied. The bank's lobby echoed as I walked in, my footsteps sharp against the polished floor. Bright overhead lights hummed softly, casting everything in clean, unforgiving clarity. The morning teller, a middle-aged woman with wire-rimmed glasses and kind eyes, smiled as I approached. Good morning. How may I help you? I need to revoke credit card access for specific authorized users on my accounts, I said. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. Are the cards lost or stolen? No, I answered evenly. I want to remove access permissions for two individuals. My daughter, Emily Harper, and her husband, Brian Harper. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. That is unusual, sir. Are you sure? Family financial matters can become complicated. I am sure, I said, without hesitation. They no longer have my permission to use my accounts. She nodded, professionalism settling in. I will need your identification and account verification. Documents slid across the counter. Forms to complete. Permissions to revoke. signatures to provide. With every pen stroke, something loosened inside me. Another invisible chain fell away. As I signed, a memory surfaced. Just 2 months earlier, Emily had called me in tears about wanting to remodel their kitchen. The estimate had been $12,000. I had transferred the money the same day, no questions asked, believing I was investing in our shared future. Their kitchen, their house, their future, not ours. Never ours. These changes will take effect immediately, the teller explained, placing the paperwork neatly into a folder. All cards connected to your accounts will now require your direct authorization. Perfect, I said. Outside, the air felt crisp and open. Another taxi waited at the curb. I had called ahead, planning each step with a clarity I had not felt in years. Back to the Pine Lodge, I said as I climbed in. As the bank disappeared behind us, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Satisfaction. The quiet relief of making a decision for myself alone. No guilt. No apologies. No second-guessing. Just clean, deliberate action. The taxi merged into traffic. A moment later, my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. Once. Twice. 3 times. I did not need to look to know who it was. The phone buzzed against my leg insistently as we moved through downtown. I pulled it out. Emily's name flashed across the screen again and again. The driver glanced at me, but kept his eyes on the road. I answered. What the hell did you do? Emily's voice exploded through the speaker before I could speak. My card just got declined at Nordstrom. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Good morning to you too, Emily, I replied calmly. Do not take that tone with me, she snapped. I was buying heels for a work presentation, and the cashier had to cut up my card in front of everyone. The taxi jolted as it hit a pothole, pressing me briefly into the worn seat. Outside the window, Spokane's main street slid past, steady and indifferent, as everything I had been building toward finally began to move. The taxi rolled past the same storefronts where Emily had dragged me countless times over the years, my credit card always ready in my hand, buying things she insisted were necessities. Shoes, dresses, accessories, emergencies that somehow always involved my money. How does it feel? I asked calmly, my voice steady and firm. How does what feel? She snapped. Being humiliated by my own father? Being treated like a burden? Like an embarrassment? I let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. Yesterday, I said evenly, you told me I was a burden on your shoulders. Today, you are calling because you cannot buy shoes with my money. The line went quiet. In the rearview mirror, I saw the taxi driver keep his face neutral, though his eyes flicked toward me briefly. He had clearly heard enough family arguments in his back seat to recognize the sound of something breaking. This is different, Emily finally said, her voice higher now, edged with panic. You cannot just cut us off. We have bills, responsibilities. So did I replied. A memory flashed through my mind. Emily at 25, calling me from a boutique in Portland, breathless with excitement because she had found the perfect dress for a charity event. $300 for a single evening. I had given her my card number over the phone without hesitation, convinced her happiness justified the cost. Dad, you are being ridiculous, she said. This is not how family works. You are right, I said quietly. Outside the window, a young mother pushed a stroller past a bus stop. Her toddler pointed at a passing dog, laughing with pure, uncomplicated joy. A moment untouched by guilt or manipulation. Family does not work by calling each other burdens. I continued. Family does not work by throwing someone out of their home for having friends over. We did not kick you out, Emily said quickly. You chose to leave. After you told me to find somewhere else to live. Her voice wavered. That is not. We were just frustrated. You cannot, she started. I can, I said, surprising even myself with how natural the words felt. I can make decisions about my own money. And it sounds like this is a burden you will have to carry now. I ended the call gently. The phone went silent in my hand. The taxi continued through town, passing the public library where I had taken Emily to story hour decades earlier, then the park where she learned to ride a bike while I jogged behind her, one hand steady on her back. As her voice faded from my thoughts, the road ahead felt clearer, firmer, defined by boundaries I had never allowed myself to draw before. "Everything okay back there?" the driver asked. "Better by the minute," I replied. The Pine Lodge Motel came into view, its neon sign glowing against the Montana sky. But as we approached, I noticed someone standing near the entrance. Tall, broad-shouldered, arms crossed in a posture I knew all too well. The taxi slowed. My phone stayed mercifully quiet. Someone was waiting for me. The cab rolled to a stop on the gravel lot, afternoon shadows stretching long across the ground. Through the windshield, I saw him clearly now. Brian paced beneath the flickering motel sign like a caged animal. His shoulders were tight, fists clenched, anger radiating from every movement. "That will be $12.50, the driver said, though his attention was fixed on Brian. I handed him $15. "Keep the change." The moment I stepped out of the taxi, Brian spotted me. He charged across the lot, his steps sharp and aggressive, his face flushed red with fury. "Frank, what the hell do you think you are doing?" he shouted. I closed the door calmly and turned to face him. The air smelled of dust and distant pine, peaceful in sharp contrast to the storm burning in his eyes. "Brian," I said evenly, "what brings you here?" "Do not play stupid," he snapped, closing the distance between us. The veins in his neck stood out. "Emily's card got declined. Our airline confirmation was canceled. You think you can just—" "I think I can decide what happens to my own money," I interrupted, my voice steady despite my pulse quickening. A radical idea, I know. Brian's hands curled into fists, his sleeves tightening around his forearms. As gravel crunched beneath his feet, another memory surfaced. Years earlier, when his business partner had stolen $30,000 and left him desperate, I had written a check the same day he called. No questions, no conditions, because I believed family meant fixing each other's mistakes. "You senile old fool," Brian snarled, stepping closer. "You are going to fix this right now." "Or what?" I asked, stepping back, not from fear, but to keep space between us. He lunged, grabbing for my collar. Before he could touch me, the taxi driver was suddenly there, placing himself squarely between us. His presence was solid, controlled, unmistakably experienced. "That is enough," the driver said firmly. Brian froze mid-motion, startled by the interruption. "This is none of your business. This gentleman paid me fairly and treated me with respect," the driver replied, unmoved despite being shorter. "If you want to throw punches, do it somewhere else. I will not stand by and watch you threaten a decent man." The gravel lot fell quiet, the motel sign buzzing overhead, as the balance of power shifted in ways Brian clearly had not expected. The standoff hung in the air, fragile and sharp, like it could break in either direction. Brian's face shifted through anger, confusion, and something that looked uncomfortably close to embarrassment. Three men stood in a motel parking lot, and somehow two strangers had just protected each other from the third. "This is not over, Frank," Brian snapped. But even as he said it, he was already retreating. "Not even close," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He turned and stalked back to his pickup truck. The engine roared to life, far louder than necessary. Gravel sprayed as he tore out of the lot, the sound bouncing off the motel's aging walls before fading into the distance. I turned to the taxi driver. He was calmly adjusting his jacket, as if this kind of thing happened every day. "Thank you," I said. "That was unexpected kindness." He shrugged, a faint smile creasing his weathered face. "A man cannot just stand by and watch a bully do his thing. Take care of yourself." With that, he climbed back into his cab and pulled away, leaving me alone in the sudden quiet. I walked toward my room, key card steady in my hand despite the adrenaline still humming through my body. The lock beeped softly, a green light flashing its approval. As the door opened, the distant rumble of Brian's truck disappeared entirely. The room looked exactly the same as I had left it that morning. Same bed, same table, same quiet stillness. But I was not the same man who had walked out earlier. Standing up to Brian, having a complete stranger step in to defend my dignity, watching my son-in-law retreat like a defeated playground bully. All of it hardened into something far more solid than anger. Resolve. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside a space where my real plans could finally begin. Morning came wrapped in sunlight. Golden beams sliced through the motel blinds, striping the faded carpet and pulling me from the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had experienced in years. The confrontation from the day before had not drained me. If anything, it had energized me. Standing my ground had unlocked strength I had forgotten I possessed. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing my best casual shirt and a clean pair of slacks. Today required intention, dignity, a version of myself that matched the seriousness of what I was about to do. The man staring back at me from the bathroom mirror looked older than he once had, but he also looked steadier, more certain. The bus stop sat 3 blocks from the motel, marked by a simple metal sign and a narrow wooden bench. Public transportation in town was limited, but it would take me exactly where I needed to go. As I waited, watching commuters hurry past clutching coffee cups and purpose, I felt no rush at all. Time was finally working for me, not against me. The bus arrived with a soft hiss of air brakes. The driver nodded as I climbed aboard. Through the window, rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, unmoved by family drama or personal reckoning. My thoughts drifted to the medical bills I had quietly paid just a month earlier. Brian's emergency room visit after a hiking accident. $800 charged to my card without so much as a phone call. Downtown legal district. I told the driver when he asked my stop. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Big day. You could say that. The law office of Morrison, Baker and Associates occupied the second floor of a historic brick building on Main Street. Inside, the receptionist, a composed woman with silver-threaded hair and kind eyes, listened carefully as I explained why I was there. "Mr. Morrison can see you now," she said, guiding me down a hallway lined with framed diplomas and black-and-white photographs from the town's legal past. James Morrison was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-40s. He had the focused calm of someone accustomed to handling people's final decisions. His office smelled faintly of leather and old books, the wood-paneled walls reinforcing the gravity of the space. "Mr. Harper," he said, settling behind his desk, "I understand you would like to revise your will. Completely rewrite it." I replied, taking a seat and feeling the full weight of the choice settle into place. "I want to establish a charitable foundation," I continued, "instead of leaving everything to my family." His eyebrows lifted just slightly, but his voice remained even. "That is entirely your right. Do you have specific charities in mind?" I leaned back in the chair, hands folded, feeling calmer than I had in years. "Yes," I said, "and I want to make sure this time, my legacy actually reflects who I am. Organizations that help seniors who have been abandoned by their families," I said, choosing my words carefully. "People who need their dignity restored after it has been taken from them." For the next hour, Mr. Morrison and I worked through every detail. He walked me through the options, the legal implications, the consequences I needed to understand. Under the steady hum of fluorescent lights, clause by clause, we reshaped my future. With every adjustment, something heavy loosened inside me, years of quiet endurance giving way to deliberate, intentional steps forward. "This is remarkably brave," Morrison said as I signed the final pages. "Most people struggle to make changes this significant, especially when family is involved." "Most people," I replied evenly, "have not been called a burden by their own daughter." The pen scratched across the paper, the sound precise and final, like carving a new road where none had existed before. Each signature closed a door on the life I had been living and opened another that felt cleaner, more honest. These changes take effect immediately, Morrison explained, sliding the documents into a manila envelope. Your assets will be held in trust and distributed exactly as you specified. Your family will be notified only if they were named in prior versions of your will. Perfect, I said. We shook hands. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. Over the years, I had learned that lawyers often dealt with family wounds as much as legal language. Morrison had seen enough ugly inheritance battles to recognize resolve when it stood in front of him. As I stepped out onto the courthouse steps, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The afternoon sun sharpened everything into focus. Storefronts, passing cars, people moving through ordinary days, unaware that somewhere among them, an older man had just taken his life back. My phone chimed softly in my pocket, a sound I had come to associate with complications. I pulled it out, squinting in the bright Montana light. It was a calendar reminder I had apparently set and forgotten. A reminder to call my sister in Oregon, a visit I had postponed year after year to accommodate Emily's endless needs. Now, it felt different, like a promise I had made to myself, a step toward reconnecting with someone who actually valued me. My thumb hovered over the screen as the realization settled in. I was not finished yet. The busy sidewalk welcomed me back into the rhythm of town life as I left Morrison's office. The signed papers rested securely in my jacket pocket. Their weight was both symbolic and real. The future I had spent decades building for Emily and Brian had just been redirected to people who would appreciate it. A city bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Passengers boarded with the patient efficiency of people accustomed to small-town schedules. I climbed aboard, dropped exact change into the fare box, and took a seat by the window as Montana's wide landscape rolled past. As the bus pulled away from the legal district, my eye caught a travel advertisement taped to a storefront window. White sand, palm trees, the promise of a tropical escape. The image hit me hard. 3 weeks earlier, I had booked that Hawaii vacation. First-class flights for all three of us. An ocean view suite at a luxury resort. A rental car upgrade. I had spent $28,000 without blinking, imagining Emily and Brian's faces when I surprised them with the printed confirmations. A family trip, I had told myself. A chance to heal old wounds. The irony burned now. Back in my motel room, I pulled out my phone and opened the airline app. The reservation loaded instantly. Harper party of 3. Departing July 15th. Returning July 22nd. Premium seating. Priority boarding. Complimentary champagne. I tapped cancel reservation. Are you sure you want to cancel? Cancellation fees may apply. My thumb hovered for exactly 1 second before I confirmed. The hotel booking came next. 7 nights of supposed paradise, now replaced by a red canceled stamp in my email inbox. As the confirmations stacked up on the screen and the air conditioner hummed quietly in the background, a deep satisfaction took root. Deeper than regret. Deeper than anger. Each canceled reservation felt like another shackle falling away. Another choice made for my own peace. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Mark Harrison. My oldest friend. One of the few people who had witnessed last night's humiliation firsthand. I tapped his number. Frank, he said when he answered. How are you holding up after yesterday? Better than I expected, I replied honestly. Mark, are you free for coffee this afternoon? There is something I need to tell you. Of course, he said without hesitation. The usual place. Riverbend Cafe on 3rd Street. 2 hours work. Perfect, I said. I will see you there. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, glancing at the clock by the bed. 45 minutes until our meeting. Enough time to absorb everything I had done that morning. Enough time to prepare for another conversation that marked my distance from the man I had been and my movement toward the man I was becoming. The cancellation emails stopped arriving, leaving the room blessedly quiet. Outside, the town continued at its unhurried pace. unaware that in room 12 of the Pine Lodge Motel, a man was carefully dismantling every bridge he had built for ungrateful children. I straightened my collar and checked my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back was still Frank Harper's, but the eyes held something new. A clarity that comes only when a person finally understands the difference between love and enabling, between family loyalty and self-respect. The clock read 1:30. It was time to meet the only person from yesterday who had genuinely seemed glad to see me. The brass handle of Murphy's Cafe felt solid and reassuring in my hand as I pushed the door open. Afternoon sunlight faded into the warm amber glow of hanging Edison bulbs, brick walls exposed and welcoming. The smell of freshly ground coffee and warm pastries wrapped around me like a familiar embrace. It was a sharp contrast to the sterile formality of the law office and the hollow quiet of my motel room. Mark was already there. He stood up from a corner table the moment he saw me, wearing the same sincere smile that had made him such steady company during the disaster that had been my birthday dinner. His handshake was firm, his eyes full of the kind of concern that only comes from decades of friendship. "Frank, my friend," he said, studying my face for a moment. "You look different, stronger somehow." "It is amazing what a good night's sleep and a few hard decisions can do," I replied. We ordered at the counter. Black coffee for Mark, a cappuccino for me, a small indulgence I rarely allowed myself back when Emily tracked my spending like a hawk watching prey. Once seated, steam curling up from our mugs, Mark leaned forward. He had the patient focus of someone who knew when a friend needed to unload. "So," he said gently, "what happened after we left last night?" Linda was worried. She said she heard raised voices when we were saying goodbye. The story poured out of me. Emily's cold dismissal of our guests. Brian claiming authority over the house. The key placed on the coffee table. The suitcase rolling through dark streets. The strange peace I found in that narrow motel bed. "They actually threw you out?" Mark asked, disbelief heavy in his voice. "On your birthday?" "After calling me a burden," I said. He shook his head slowly. "That is unforgivable." I kept going. The blocked credit cards. Emily's furious call. Brian showing up at the motel and trying to intimidate me. By the time I finished, Mark sat back, silent, absorbing it all. "And then this morning," I added, "I rewrote my will. Everything goes to charity now." His coffee froze halfway to his mouth. "Everything. A foundation for seniors who have been abandoned by their families," I said. "People who know what it feels like when love gets used as a weapon." The silence between us was broken only by clinking dishes and quiet conversations nearby. Mark set his cup down carefully and looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "You know what, Frank," he said firmly. "Good for you." I blinked. "I have watched Emily and Brian treat you like a walking cash machine for years," he continued. "All of us have. We just did not know how to say anything without crossing a line." "You noticed it too?" I asked. "Of course," he said. "Last night alone. The way she rolled her eyes when you talked about your garden. The way Brian kept checking his phone like he had somewhere better to be, at your own birthday dinner." The memories rushed back. Emily's bored expression as I talked about my tomato plants. Brian's dismissive snort when I mentioned visiting my sister in Oregon. Things I had noticed, but dismissed as normal family tension instead of the disrespect they really were. "I keep wondering when it changed," I said quietly. "When I stopped being her father and became her funding source." "It probably happened slowly," Mark said. "People do not wake up cruel. They drift their one compromise at a time." He reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his. "But you stopped the drift," he said. "That takes courage." My phone started ringing. The sound cut through the cafe like an alarm. Emily's name flashed on the screen. Her smiling photo from last Christmas looked foreign now, like evidence from another life. Mark glanced at the phone, then back at me. "You going to answer?" I watched the screen pulse with each ring, knowing whatever she said would only confirm every decision I had made since walking out of that house. Around us, the cafe carried on, unaware that at table 7, a man was choosing between his past and his future. I answered and deliberately put the call on speaker, setting the phone on the table between our mugs. "Dad, have you completely lost your mind?" Emily's voice exploded from the speaker, turning heads nearby. "Logan told me about your little tantrum at that trashy motel." "Good afternoon to you too, Emily," I said calmly. "Do not you dare talk to me like that," she snapped. "I just got cancellation emails. Our Hawaii trip. $28,000 gone because you are having some kind of senior breakdown." Mark's eyes widened as her voice filled the cafe. Conversations around us slowed, curiosity replacing politeness. "The trip was canceled," I said evenly, "because the person paying for it decided he did not want a vacation with people who call him a burden." "This is insane," she shouted. "You cannot just. Logan thinks we should have you declared mentally incompetent. You are clearly not thinking straight." Her voice echoed off the brick walls, drawing open stares from nearby tables. And in that moment, as her words rang out for strangers to hear, a sharp wave of validation washed through me, stronger than the sting of loss, stronger than the guilt I had carried for years. I knew, without a single doubt, that I had done the right thing. A memory flashed through my mind without warning. Last year's family cruise to Alaska. Another surprise trip I had fully funded. Emily had spent the entire week complaining. The food was wrong. The weather was wrong. The excursions I had researched and booked with care were boring. I remembered standing on the deck alone, staring at glaciers, wondering why generosity always seemed to sour once it reached her hands. "Actually, Emily," I said into the phone, my voice steady, "I am thinking more clearly than I have in years." "You are destroying our family," she shot back. "How are we supposed to explain this to people? How are we supposed to pay for?" "You are supposed to pay for things the same way every other adult does," I interrupted calmly. "With your own money, from your own job, using your own resources." Silence followed. Not long. Exactly 3 seconds. Then her voice came back sharper, thinner, edged with panic. "You cannot do this. We have obligations. Brian's business needs." "Brian's business is not my responsibility," I said evenly. "Your shopping habits are not my responsibility. Your inability to live within your means is not my responsibility." Each sentence landed with quiet weight, shaped by years of swallowed frustration. "I am done being your personal bank." "Dad, please," she said, her voice cracking. "You are scaring me. This is not like you." "You are right," I replied. "The old me would have apologized by now. He would have sent money to fix whatever crisis you created. He would have begged forgiveness for expecting basic respect from his own child." Across the table, Mark reached out and squeezed my free hand, silent encouragement grounding me. "But that man is gone," I continued. "The man who raised you. The man who sacrificed everything for your happiness. The man who believed family meant something. You killed him the night you threw him out of his own house." I paused, feeling no anger now, only certainty. "What you are talking to now is what is left," I said. "And what is left has decided he is finished." "You are my father," Emily said desperately. "You cannot just abandon us. Watch me." I ended the call with a light tap of my finger. Her voice cut off mid-protest. For a single heartbeat, the cafe went completely silent. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman at a corner table began to clap. Slowly, deliberately. Her hands came together with quiet conviction. A businessman by the window joined her. Then a young mother with a stroller. A college student with a laptop. One by one, the sound spread. Within seconds, the entire cafe was applauding. Not mockingly, not loudly, but with genuine support, as if everyone present had just witnessed something rare and necessary. Some people nodded at me with understanding. Others smiled with the recognition of those who had their own stories of ungrateful family members. "Well done," Mark said softly, joining the applause. "Truly well done." The clapping faded, leaving behind a warm murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of cups returning to saucers. I lifted my cappuccino and noticed, with quiet surprise, that my hands were completely steady. Outside, a siren wailed briefly before fading into the distance. The sound blended into the low hum of ordinary life continuing on, even as something extraordinary had just shifted for me. I stood, smiling, and shook Mark's hand. "Thank you," I said, "for listening, for being there." "Anytime, my friend," he replied. "And Frank, I am proud of you." The next month unfolded like pages turning in a book I had never allowed myself to open. Within a week, I contacted Sarah Mitchell, one of the most respected real estate agents in town. She had a confident, no-nonsense manner that mirrored the direction my life was taking. "I want something that is completely mine," I told her as we drove through tree-lined neighborhoods. "Somewhere with room to breathe." The house on Ridgeview Lane was perfect. A modest single-story home with wide windows facing the mountains. A kitchen designed for someone who actually enjoyed cooking. A front porch that caught both sunrise and sunset. The previous owners had cared for it well, leaving behind fresh paint and the feeling of possibility. "It has good bones," Sarah said as I signed the paperwork. "Like its new owner." Moving day arrived with the kind of crisp Montana morning that made everything feel new. Everything I owned fit into one car. Clothes, toiletries, Susan's photograph, the manila envelope holding my rewritten will. Everything else, I realized, had been excess weight. With each mile beneath the wide sky, I felt old obligations loosen and fall away. I drove to Flathead Lake. I hiked trails I had promised myself I would explore someday. I learned that solitude felt like freedom, not loneliness. My phone buzzed now and then. Messages from Emily and Brian. Apologies that felt rehearsed. Requests for mortgage help and business expenses. Accusations of cruelty wrapped in the language of family duty. I read each message once. Then I deleted it. Brian left a voicemail that was almost painful in its desperation. "Frank, come on. We all said things we did not mean. Emily misses you. I miss you. Can we not work this out like family?" Family. The word no longer had the power to trap me. Instead, I spent my days choosing for myself. Buying groceries based on what I wanted to eat. Browsing the hardware store for projects that interested only me. Sitting in bookstores and selecting novels I had always meant to read. Finally having the mental space to enjoy stories that were not defined by other people's emergencies. 3 weeks into June, I stood on my new front porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. A travel brochure fluttered in my hand. Scotland, Ireland, places I had dreamed of visiting but never prioritized because Emily always had more urgent needs for my money. The pages turned like fresh chapters. Each destination represented a choice made for joy rather than obligation. The evening breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the pines, rustling softly like quiet applause. Behind me, the lights were on inside my house. Dinner waited on the stove. A home perfectly sized for one man who had finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. Tomorrow, I might call a travel agent. Next week, I might enroll in that photography class at the community center. The future stretched ahead, free of guilt and the exhausting arithmetic of keeping ungrateful people satisfied. As darkness settled over the mountains and stars emerged across the wide Montana sky, I folded the brochure and slipped it into my shirt pocket, close to my heart. The night was quiet, broken only by wind through the trees and the distant call of an owl claiming its territory. I had claimed mine too.